Every possible luxury if she gave birth to their child. Charlie Langston has the exclusive details now from our New York news.
Explain it to these kids that it's very doable. And that was a big motivator for us, is how can we help out?
First wedding looked like as far from a royal event as you can imagine. Beer and barbecue on a beach in Jamaica.
You know how some stories don't vanish because they're fake, but because someone made sure they wouldn't be found? Because they were inconvenient, because they didn't fit the picture that was being built. Before the titles, before the palace gates, before the interviews that circled the globe, there was an entire chapter of Meghan Markle's life that quietly slipped through the cracks. Not whispered about, not denied, just erased. This isn't about gossip pulled from thin air. This is about a missing paperwork from a Las Vegas chapel no one likes to mention, and a man who stayed silent long enough that the world forgot he was ever part of the story. He knew her before the cameras, before the Polish, before everything was curated and controlled. Trevor Engelson was there when life was messy, unfiltered, unfinished. And what he knows doesn't just add a footnote, it shifts the entire narrative. Because this isn't the version we've been handed. This is what happens when the past refuses to stay buried. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Let's be honest for a second. Fame has a way of scrubbing people clean. One day you're just living your life, making choices, messing up, learning as you go, and then suddenly there's a new version of you on display. The rough edges disappear, the complicated parts get softened, and the story everyone believes starts to drift away from the reality you actually lived. That's what makes this so unsettling. Before Meghan Markle became a global name, before anyone cared what she wore or said or posted, she was just Meghan. No flashing cameras, no think pieces dissecting her personality, no world watching her every move. Just a young woman in her 20s, figuring things out in real time, making decisions without knowing how they'd echo years later.
And in the entertainment industry are very stressful. From my observation, they just realized it couldn't work.
During those years, Trevor wasn't just someone passing through her life. He wasn't a brief relationship or a forgettable chapter. He was her husband, her first husband. They built a life together, shared space, shared plans, shared a version of reality that never made it into the official biography. That's what makes his silence so powerful. He knew her before the narrative was locked in, before timelines were polished and stories simplified. He saw the moments that didn't survive the edit, the parts that quietly vanished before the public ever had a chance to ask questions. And here's the thing about Trevor. He didn't rush out to sell a story. He didn't chase headlines. He moved on, built his own life, found happiness, started a family.
Married to Trevor from 2011 to 2013. I didn't actually realize she was previously married before Prince.
By all accounts, he's content, not bitter, not vengeful, just someone who lived through something that later got rewritten without his consent. But when you're actually there, when you live through something in real time, you notice when pieces start disappearing. And according to people who knew him, Trevor noticed.
Recently visited Northwestern. She's a graduate there, that's just north of Chicago. They said, we have a lot of famous alums.
Not because he was looking for trouble, but because the story being told didn't quite match the one he remembered. When someone becomes famous, their past doesn't get erased with lies. It gets erased with omissions. Details stop being mentioned. Timelines get smoothed out. Inconvenient chapters quietly drop off the page. And it happens so gradually that most people never question it. One day there's a full, messy human story. The next day there's just the version everyone agrees to accept. And then there's the gap, the one that's explained so confidently that no one thinks to look twice. But it's still there if you know where to look. Trevor stayed quiet for years, maybe out of respect. Maybe because he knew his voice wouldn't matter once the narrative was set. When one person becomes one of the most talked about women in the world, and the other becomes the ex, who do you think people listen to? Silence doesn't mean nothing happened. It just means it happened before anyone was paying attention. And that's where things start to get uncomfortable. We're going back to the mid-1990s, Las Vegas. Not the glamorous version you see in movies. Not neon lights and high roller suites. A small chapel just off the strip. The kind most people walk past without noticing. Plain, forgettable, ordinary. Inside that chapel was an 18-year-old Meghan. No fame, no future Duchess headlines, no audience. Just a teenager the world didn't know existed yet. She wasn't alone. She was there with Joe Giuliano. No photographers, no grand celebration, no white dress moment. Just a simple ceremony. Quiet, private, quick, the kind that takes 15 minutes and ends with everyone going home. But simple doesn't mean fake. They signed paperwork, real paperwork. A marriage certificate filed with the state of Nevada. Not symbolic, not pretend, legal, binding. For a brief moment in time, Meghan Markle was someone's wife, and then it vanished. Not dragged through months of divorce proceedings, not dissolved slowly, it was erased. In Nevada, when both parties agree, things can disappear fast. Days, not months. Filed, processed, sealed. On paper, it becomes like it never happened. And when records are sealed, they don't leave clues. They don't sit half visible. They disappear completely. No trail, no search results, nothing to point back to. That's exactly what happened. And here's where the silence starts to feel deliberate. Because right after that weekend, something else disappears. A whole year. The official explanation sounds harmless enough. A gap year, time to travel, to explore, to find herself before college. People accept it instantly because it makes sense if you don't look for proof. But when you do look, there's nothing. No travel photos, no program records, no stamped passports, no memories documented anywhere. For someone who supposedly spent a year seeing the world, there's not a single verified trace. Instead, whispers point to one place, Chicago. According to people connected to the Giuliano family, Meghan didn't travel the globe. She stayed quietly in Chicago, lived under their roof, away from Hollywood, away from familiar faces, away from questions. That year isn't just empty, it's locked down. And what makes it stranger is how clean it is. No stray documents, no old photos, no accidental mentions. Making a whole year vanish doesn't happen by accident. It requires intention, planning, control. And midway through that year, according to those whispers, something life-altering happened. A birth, not in a hospital with announcements and records, quietly, privately, away from systems that leave trails. A baby girl. And almost immediately, a decision was made. The Giuliano family would raise her. She'd be given a new identity, a new life, protected by silence. One person later described it with a single sentence that still echoes, "She was Meghan's before she was ours." Let that sink in. That sentence doesn't deny the child existed. It confirms it. By late 1995, everything was set. The baby had a home. The records stayed sealed. And Meghan disappeared from that world completely. When she reappears, it's at Northwestern University. New chapter, new life, theater classes, friends, ambition, a future unfolding exactly the way it's supposed to. And at the same time, something else happens. All contact with the Giuliano family stops. Not a slow fade, a clean break, no visits, no calls, no acknowledgements. The Vegas marriage never mentioned again. The year never explained beyond a vague story. The child erased entirely from the public narrative. From that point on, the timeline flows perfectly. College, acting, career, fame, no missing pieces, no sealed files, just a smooth rise, until years later, when someone speaks. In early 2017, as Meghan's relationship with Prince Harry becomes global news, a woman named Noel Ramirez comes forward. She isn't a stranger. She knew the Giuliano family. She was there during that quiet year in Chicago, and she tells a story that doesn't match the official version at all. According to Noel, the gap year was a cover. Meghan was in Chicago the entire time. She witnessed the pregnancy, she remembers the birth, she remembers the arrangement, the Giuliano family taking the child in and raising her as their own. No rage, no bitterness, just a matter-of-fact recounting of what she lived through. The media reacts exactly how you'd expect. Some amplify it, others dismiss it as gossip. The public is split. There's no hard documentation, no certificates, no proof that satisfies everyone. But Noel doesn't back down. Her timeline matches the missing year. Her details line up too cleanly to ignore, and the question lingers. Why make this up? What does she gain? And then there's the child herself. If this is true, there's a woman out there who grew up believing one story about her life, while another one exists just beneath the surface, a foundation that could shift everything she understands about herself. And even if she discovered it, then what? There's no confrontation, no public acknowledgement, no closure. The silence was part of the deal. So the story remains suspended, whispered, never confirmed, never denied. When you step back, the pattern becomes hard to ignore. Things that don't fit disappear. The marriage, the year, the birth, the connections, all smoothed out until the image is spotless. And maybe that's how public figures are built. Not with lies, but with careful editing. But when that editing involves other people, especially a child, the cost becomes heavier. So here we are, with a Vegas marriage, a missing year, a family arrangement, and a silence that's lasted decades. Whether you believe it or not, the pieces exist. And sometimes, fragments are enough to tell a story all on their own. If this made you think, hit like. Drop your thoughts. And if you want more stories like this, subscribe. Because there's always more beneath the surface. And here's the part people don't like to sit with because it doesn't come with a clean ending or a satisfying answer. Silence doesn't just protect one person, it traps everyone inside it. The longer it lasts, the heavier it gets. And decades later, that weight doesn't disappear just because life moved on. Think about how carefully everything had to be managed for this to stay buried. Not one accidental slip, not one loose document, not one old friend publicly reminiscing about that year in a way that raised eyebrows. That kind of control doesn't happen by luck, it happens because everyone involved understands the consequences of breaking the quiet. The understanding that some doors once opened can never be closed again. And what makes this even more unsettling is how familiar the pattern feels. A past that doesn't align with the future gets rewritten. People who belong to that past slowly fade out. Connections are severed cleanly, not because they were meaningless, but because they were too meaningful to risk resurfacing. It's not chaos, it's strategy. For the public, the story stays simple. A young woman with ambition, a straightforward rise, a polished background that fits neatly into interviews and biographies. Nothing that distracts from the image. Nothing that complicates the narrative. Because complexity doesn't sell as well as clarity. But real lives are never that neat. Somewhere there are people who remember a different version of events. Not dramatic, not sensational. Just real. Quiet memories that never got to exist out loud. And somewhere, possibly, there's someone living an ordinary life, unaware that her origin story may be far more complicated than she was ever told. That's the part no one can spin. Because if this story is even partially true, then the silence wasn't just about protecting an image. It was about making sure certain questions would never be asked at all. Questions that don't have easy answers. Questions that would force uncomfortable conversations. And maybe that's why this never fully goes away. Because buried stories have a way of resurfacing, even if only in fragments. A comment here, a recollection there, a timeline that doesn't quite line up. Enough to make people pause. Enough to make them wonder. This isn't about tearing anyone down. It's about acknowledging that behind every flawless public image, there's usually a human story that didn't make the final cut. And sometimes the most revealing things aren't what's said, but what's been carefully left out. So the questions remain. Why the sealed records? Why the missing year? Why the absolute break from everyone connected to that time? None of it proves anything on its own. But together, it paints a picture that's hard to ignore. And until someone decides to speak openly, this story will stay exactly where it is, suspended between rumor and reality, between memory and silence, waiting, because the past doesn't disappear just because it's inconvenient.